Conference, can I thank Paul McKeever from the Police Federation for such a powerful speech to us today. For many years, when our party has gathered, we have heard from nurses, teachers, business leaders, scientists, athletes, and thanked all of them for the work that they do. But until this year, we have never heard from the police, the people who work tirelessly to protect our communities. And Conference, we pay tribute to Paul and all of them now. To the officers who respond to the 999 call with no idea what they will find when they arrive or whether they will return home safely at the end of their shift. To the officer who explains to a teenager that carrying a knife means his own life is in danger. Or the 8 riot police who stood on St John's Road in Clapham Junction that awful August night as 350 rioters swarmed down Lavender Hill towards them. We will not always agree with the police. Labour ministers have had disagreements with the Police Federation in the past. But we back the things that Paul has said today, and our party believes strongly in respect for the police, in backing the work they do, and we say thank you again through Paul to the police officers up and down the country who work so hard to keep us safe. And Conference, North Yorkshire Police were among the emergency services to attend the accident at Kellingley Colliery at the edge of my constituency, where a miner died tragically yesterday. And thank you for all of your tributes to the miners this morning. All of our thoughts are with their families today. Conference, we know in the Labour Party how much it matters to cut crime. That's why this summer, Ed Miliband showed such strong leadership in response to the hacking of Millie Dowler's phone and those awful August riots. And Ed has talked about the importance of responsibility and respect, and in his great speech yesterday about the quiet crisis for families across Britain when things go wrong. And take the Yorkshire mother, whose family I spoke to after her house was burgled. In the statistics, that's a routine crime, over 500,000 similar crimes each year. She wasn't threatened or hurt. She didn't even see the burglars. She was upstairs asleep with her children at the time. Yet the impact on her life is still immense. Now she can't sleep. She jumps at every noise, every creak, every child's cough. The laptop they stole had the family photos on, and they stole her car keys and her car, so she's missed work. Crime hurts. The burglary that destroys someone's confidence, the copper theft that stops thousands of commuters getting to work on time, the stalking and harassment that means a woman is too scared to leave home, the abuse that bruises a child's face and poisons his whole life. That's why Labour was right to work so hard to cut crime, to keep people safe and secure, and it's also why, Conference, we must do the same again. Of course, we didn't get everything right. We didn't need 90-day detention. We didn't need 42-day detention. They were never justified by the evidence. On immigration, we should have had transitional controls for Eastern Europe. We should have brought in a points-based system earlier. Managed migration has benefits for our economy and our culture, but we also need to recognise its impact on our communities, and that means strong, fair controls that are properly enforced. Conference, of course, we have to learn from our mistakes, but we should learn from what we got right, too. And Tony Blair was right. Tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, because it worked. Crime fell by 40%. The first government since records began where crime went down, not up. 7 million fewer crimes a year. That is Labour's record, and we should be proud of it. But we know that crime is still too high. We want crime to fall further, but the Tories don't get it. I don't think they ever did. In 1978, Jack Smart came to Labour Party conference from Castleford in my constituency, and he said of the Tories then, "They do not have to live in vandalised communities. They do not have to drive the trams which have missiles thrown into the cabs. They do not have to take charge of the buses and deal with the rowdies." My old friend Jack was right. Can you imagine David Cameron and George Osborne dealing with what Jack called the rowdies? They struggle to deal with rowdies of their own. They can't even control Boris Johnson. And what is David Cameron's answer to crime? 20% front-loaded cuts to the police. It's shocking. 650 police officers cut from Merseyside, 750 from Wales, 1,200 from the West Midlands, nearly 2,000 officers from the Met. Right across the country, 16,000 police officers lost. This is a reckless risk to take with the fight against crime. And Theresa May says they will all come from the back office, but the truth is they're putting officers back in the back office because the back office itself has been so heavily cut. The staff members that Unison represent, who do the jobs that keep constables out on the streets, too often taken for granted. Thousands of them have already gone. Conference, the police do have to make their fair share of the cuts. But we said 12% budget cuts based on independent advice on what the police need to protect the front line. That's £1 billion over the course of the Parliament, but the government has gone for £2 billion in cuts, with the steepest cuts in the first 2 years. We've said it before, it is too far, too fast, and it is communities that are paying the price. And Conference, here's the reality of what those cuts mean. You may have seen this story in the papers. Sergeant Kevin Brooks, who has worked for South Wales Police for many years. And this summer, he won a Police Bravery Award after tackling a criminal who deliberately rammed a patrol car with his 4x4 at risk of crushing an officer to death. The Prime Minister invited him to Downing Street, posed for a photo with him. But only days later, back in South Wales, PC Brooks lost his job because of the cuts. Now we see a British Prime Minister, a Tory Prime Minister, handing P45s to crime-fighting heroes. He shouldn't be sacking the police, he should be backing the police. And how can they turn a blind eye to the evidence from the riots this summer? For 4 nights, thousands of people took to the streets to loot and to pillage, burning police cars, looting shops, torching homes, putting people's lives as well as people's livelihoods at risk. This country must never again tolerate such lawlessness. Never again should criminals be allowed to take control of the streets, and they cannot be allowed to get away with it. But Conference, it took 16,000 officers to quell the madness on London streets. Officers from Norfolk, South Wales, Hampshire, Cumbria, all joining the Met to bring the streets back under the control. 16,000 officers, Conference, that is the same number that David Cameron wants to cut. How out of touch can you get? Police numbers do matter. You don't cut crime by cutting the police. And Conference, we need enough police, and we need the police to do a good job. Labour introduced important reforms. Neighbourhood policing, to get the police out of their cars and onto the beat. Changing the law to make police, councils, youth services, probation all work together in partnership to prevent crime. We need to go further. But what did we get from Theresa May and David Cameron? Just chaos and confusion. They promise less bureaucracy, but they increase the forms that officers have to fill. They promise to professionalise the service, but then abolish the training to deliver it. Breathless promises this summer to send in the army, the troops on the streets of Britain. Prime Minister, you don't need to bring in the army if you have enough police. So yes, we need further reform right across the criminal justice system. As Sadiq Khan said this morning, more support for victims and the important work that he is doing on a new victims' law. And on policing, what the Police Federation and the Superintendents Association have called for is right. Now is the time for a serious vision for the future of policing. A royal commission or a heavyweight independent review. The government has refused to do so, so we will. We are setting up an independent review to look at the crime challenges of the 21st century and how policing needs to adapt and respond, building on the best of British and international policing, vigorous and challenging on the changes that are needed, but working with the police, not trying to undermine them. And it will be led by someone who started as a beat officer in London and rose to be the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And I am grateful to the much-respected Lord John Stevens for agreeing to chair this important independent review. Conference next week at the Tory Party conference. We'll hear a lot of tough talk from David Cameron about broken Britain, cracking down on crime and gangs. Tough talk from a Prime Minister who is still cutting the police, still cutting their powers, still pushing up unemployment, and has barely mentioned crime since he started in the job. He says it now, but he hasn't done it before. And Prime Minister, it shouldn't take a riot. Conference, the police need strong powers to cut crime alongside strong checks and balances, safeguards to prevent abuse. But behind the rhetoric, the Tories are making it harder for the police to do their job, making it harder for councils to use CCTV, abolishing ASBOs, replacing them with weak injunctions the police can't enforce, and voting to water down counter-terror powers so that we can't ban terror suspects from London in Olympic year. And Conference, this is the Tory government that wants to slash the DNA database, despite the fact that it helped catch rioters and helps solve thousands of crimes each year. In 10 days' time, they plan to vote to take 17,000 suspected rapists off the database, despite the evidence from the police and from Rape Crisis that this will make it even harder to bring rapists to justice and prevent this horrible crime. The Tories may hope that David Cameron is moving to the right on law and order. He isn't moving right, he is just getting it wrong. And Conference, what we saw in the riots, the police see in their cells every night. Some people who are out of control, a danger to others and often to themselves. The carelessness and the anger, the hopelessness, the indifference. People who think they have nothing to lose and nothing better to aspire to. But that doesn't mean the whole of society is broken or sick. The thousands of people who stood up in our cities with brooms and not batons aren't sick. The community leaders who calmed the tensions in Birmingham aren't broken. And people like Tariq Jahan, who lost his son yet spoke up for peace, these are the communities who stand against violence, the heroes of a strong society. Behind the thin blue line stands not just thousands of police officers, but millions of British people who believe that the law should be respected and that we have obligations to one another. Crime doesn't prove society is broken. It shows that society needs to be stronger. In Labour's years, crime fell and fewer young people fell into crime. The number of young offenders fell by a third compared to the legacy the Tories left us with in 1997. But we know there are still too many people who are out of control, going off the rails, and no one drags them back. Still problem families, handing violence down rather than values down across the generations. And our answer should be to build stronger communities, as Labour Lambeth Council are doing, giving the community control of the youth service, the work to tackle gangs and support parenting. In the words of Carl Locko, one of the young people involved, he said, "We are more determined to make change happen because we don't want to bury any more of our friends. I want them to be able to do more. More action against gangs, like in Boston or in Hackney, where the police and council target gang members and confront them with the choice: get out of gangs and we will help you build a better future, or you will face the full force of the law." More action like Narissa, who we heard from earlier, and the great work that she and other young people are doing. More action like Citizens UK, working with businesses and cafes on our city streets to act as safe havens that young people can retreat to, stay safe from knife crime or bullying from gangs. The government says we can't afford to. Communities across the country know we can't afford not to. The taxpayer now has to pay out hundreds of millions of pounds in compensation to the businesses, the families hit by riots. Far better to prevent it happening in the first place. And don't forget, they can find the cash for their priorities. Next year, in Olympic year, the government will spend over £100 million electing politicians on £120,000 a year to become crime chiefs, yet at the same time, they are cutting thousands and thousands of police. But this is the year when the eyes of the world will be upon us, our great Olympic opportunity, and we cannot have a repeat of this summer's shameful violence and disorder. So the government should rethink. They should halt the crime chiefs and instead use that cash this year to put in place strong action on gangs, as Boston, Hackney and Lambeth are doing. Use that cash this year to stop 2,000 police constables being cut in Olympic year. Instead of taking action to build a stronger society and cut crime, this government is washing its hands and making it worse. Gang prevention work in Tottenham has been cut, parent support through Sure Start being closed down. Instead of requiring people to work with jobs for young people to go through the Future Jobs Fund, the government has pushed youth unemployment up, even though we know that too many of the rioters were unemployed, and that's bad for them, but it's bad for us too. The job of government is to act to prevent crime, not just stand back and lament crime. Conference. 30 years ago, the Tories said there was no such thing as society. Now they admit it exists, but they think it has failed. And they don't think government has any responsibility in supporting a stronger, fairer society to put it right. David Cameron, before the election, said on crime it was big government to blame. So that's why he's cut the police, cut back their powers, cut back youth services, cut in community support, cut back jobs and cut back hope. David Cameron's claim that the riots are the product of a broken society, to me, sounds like a form of surrender, an excuse for government to turn its back and dodge the blame if crime goes up. Because the Tories claim to be the party of law and order, but look at the facts. Every Tory government since records began has seen crime go up, not down. Tories in government do not cut crime. Because conference, in the end, they just don't believe in the things that you need to do. They don't believe in active government. They don't believe in strengthening society. If we'd said before the 97 election that under Labour, crime would fall by 40%, no one would have believed it could be done. But we did it. Tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, strong powers, strong safeguards, strong prevention, and backing the police. Labour is the party of law and order, and that is how we will stay. Thank you.